We continue learning Kitzur Yomi as we begin another week, Baruch Hashem. We pick it up from the 8th Perek, chapter Ches. Over here, the Kitzur is going to discuss that which one is allowed to do before he davens. Says the Kitzur, Mishalam Shachar. From when Amud Shachar begins, you are anointed min Mizrach, which is when there's rays coming from the sun from the east. Kivshaz Maschil Zman Tefillah, that is the time that one is allowed to daven. So again, optimally you want to daven from nates, but from alais, if you daven lamaisa, the tefillah works, and therefore that is the moment one's obligation to daven begins, and therefore you're not allowed to begin any malacha from that moment, or to deal with one's personal needs, or go on a trip before he davens. As the pasuk begins, and parenthetically over here, note 3, we point out from the Mishnah Berurah in Peites that the Isra actually begins a half hour prior. The righteousness will precede him, and will put his footsteps on the way. What is tzedek? What is the righteousness? Zutfila. Shematzdik lebayre, where he declares the righteousness of his creator. So what do we see? Davening comes first, v'hadar, and only then v'yasim pamav. Then you put your footsteps for your own endeavors. So first comes the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and then comes oneself. And if one were to go on a trip before he davens, that would have the wrong priorities. We continue with Sif Beis. Also lecha lishtois. Says the Kitzur, a difficult halacha. If one is not allowed to eat or drink before he davens. On the bottom over here, they quote the Mishnah Berurah and Peites that says you're not allowed to have more than a kebeya, a half hour before daybreak, and even less than this is also after daybreak, which means you cannot have any food before you daven. Why? You cannot eat upon blood. What does that mean? You're not allowed to eat before you daven regarding your dam, which is your physical well-being before you daven. If you eat and drink and afterwards you daven, says the pasuk. And me says Hashem, you throw me behind your gavecha, that your arrogance comes first and only afterwards you deal with God. So the Kitzur explains that what do we view it if one is eating before he davens? So I'm saying, no, what's the big deal? Let's listen. What does the Kitzur portray? What are you telling Hashem when one eats before he davens? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Excuse me. After this person has shown arrogance by attending to himself, then he goes and he accepts upon the yoke of heaven. Va'afilu, says the Kitzur, lishtas coffee yotem sukkah b'cholav, it's aser. On the bottom, in note number 8, we point out that the reason being, because that's called indulgence, and in Sif Daled we're going to see that coffee without sugar and milk is going to be mutter. Aruch HaShulchan L'maisa says you're allowed to have sugar and milk, and really it depends on, as note 8 pointed out, it depends what's called an extra indulgence. What's called geyecha? What is haughty? What is arrogant? If you're just having a coffee and a tea, maybe with a little sugar and milk just because you want to be able to daven and wake up, that would be allowed. But if it's an arrogant drink, if you're going maybe with caramel and whipped cream and all the other stuff, that would be the problem. Vish zakin v'chalash, an older or weak person, shenyach lamed al nafshay, who's not able to not eat. Until the time they finish Sibur Beis Knesses, until the time the Sibur finishes davening. But for us, it's a longer davening. So now listen what the Kitzur says. So we think the Kitzur is going to say, okay, so then eat and then go daven. Says the Kitzur, no. Yoiser toiv, it's better lahatul, it's bal shachlus b'vayisoi benachas. Daven be a chidus, be a kaddish, I say kiddush, v'yechal is a davar. Ayin l'kaman, simin, ayin zayin. So we'll see at what point in davening you could eat. And don't worry, you're not done yet. So you daven be a chidus, make kiddush, eat, then go to shul, and stand there when the tzibur davens with shachris. You can answer Amen, Baruch Hu, Kedusha, etc. without first accepting upon himself the yoke of heaven. Note number 11, it points out that if a person mamish can't daven without eating, then that will be called a tzerich refuah, which is not arrogance as we're about to see, and then you would be allowed to do such. Here we're discussing if a person is able to daven, he just can't go to shul. So we have to know what is the issue. So in the morning, he's strong enough to daven, he just can't go to shul and wait 3 hours. Okay, so what should he do? He should daven via chidos, and then he should go and daven, and then he should eat, excuse me. But now as we're about to see that l'tzerich refuah, if so mamish can't do it, let's continue. L'tzerich refuah, motzlech v'lishas kodem hatfilah. Why? Because she'ein bazem mishum geus. It's not going to be considered arrogance. And a similar scenario, a case is going to be, let's say someone has to take medication first thing in the morning, and the only way they can take medication is they put some food in the body, that would also be called the tzerich refuah. However, when one says, oh, I just can't eat, I'm starving, one should just be cognizant that we just said coffee and tea and water would be allowed. So often, all really one needs to have in the morning, a few cups of water, and then he'll be able to make it to after davening, and obviously that is what one should do. If you mamish cannot concentrate, then you're going to be allowed to. But again, this is one of those things that, let's remember, Hashem says, you deal with your gaiva and then you eat. So if that's not what you're doing, if what you're doing is, no, I want to daven, I just push and can't, okay, so then go and eat something, says the Kitzur, which whether Mr. Brewer agrees with or not is debatable, but then go daven. But that fine line between that which you're just eating in order to be able to daven, that is what one has to be careful with. And as we mentioned, often drinking really suffices. In middle of the night, also let them cut them. She's fine. I'll eat anything for you. If you're weak, again, if someone's waking up chatzais and learning throughout the night, it's a machlekes whether he's allowed to eat. Without sugar and milk, delicious because that's going to be called arrogance. And now says the kids are articulating what we all know, but we have to realize the chiddush. B'Shabbos yonter shchayvich kiddush still. Motor lishas varmilu because matfila you're allowed to lemaisa have coffee, tea, water before you davening. Ve'ena kiddush ha'akvay. Why? Because kiddush does not come before you davening. Kiddush ella b'makim suda hainu samach lachila varei. You can't eat before Shachris. Note 14 points out that it's only usher to eat before Kiddush only when you have the obligation to make Kiddush. And when does that begin? That begins when you can have a Suda, and that's going to be after Shachris. Over here, it sounds like, now whether that means after Kriyas HaTorah or not is a different story, but it sounds like it is after Shachris. Note 14 concludes that the Mishmura says you have to, yes, make Kiddush if you're eating for refuah reasons, but that is going to be a debatable point. We continue and we conclude with Siv Hey. Also, now that we dealt with, you can't do your own business. You can't go on a trip. You can't eat before you daven. It says the Kitzur, you're not allowed to go to the door of another person, which they point out so perfectly here means to go out of your way. To do what? To go and give him shalom before you daven. Note 16 quotes from the Mishnah Brura, even going over to shul to someone and greet them, one should not do. Good to Morgan. That one as well should not. With what you show this person respect. Before you give God respect. Meaning, if someone, instead of just going to daven, goes on the way to go say shalom to someone, and even in shul, the Mishmura points out, instead of going to start the daven, you go to shmooze, you're showing Hashem, I'm giving someone else honor and not you. But if you meet him by chance, then you're allowed to give shalom. You should change a little bit differently. You don't want to be busy. Note 19 points out, some would say good morning, not shalom aleichem, because you have to be going in daven. Note 20, very important, points out, if you already said Birchas HaShachar, then you're allowed to greet others that you meet, according to the Mishnah Brura. Someone else greets you, you're allowed to respond. This is so important. Let's just see this quickly. The Mishnah Brura over here, as Article so perfectly quotes for us, that the Hischla Bracha is then in Lach Shel Kachamot Litain Shalom. That's only to go off. Chaver Shel B'Shleim Mutal Lahishiv B'Cholin Yevkosh Gid Mish Kvar Spalel Mutal Lahashil Pesach Chaver Shel Spalel Litain L'Shalom Afi Sheitzarach Lashivay. So again, if you already say Berachas Shachar, then you're going to be allowed to say good morning. If not, not. And again, this is all about going out of your way. But if it's on your way, then that would be mutter just to say a simple good morning. Pick it up from Sivav B'Siyata Dishmaya.